The fluorescent lights of the emergency room cubicle hummed, a stark, indifferent sound that seemed to amplify the throbbing pain in my chest. I clutched my phone, its screen dark. Hours had passed since I'd managed to drag myself here, each breath a ragged effort, my parents' phones ringing unanswered. Then, finally, it buzzed. Not a call, but a text. From Mother. So sorry, sweetie, can't make it to ER. Clara's having a total meltdown. Her BFF just uninvited her to the biggest sleepover of the year. Absolute catastrophe. You know how sensitive she is. Doctors said it's probably just your anxiety again, like last time. Try to rest. We'll call later. XOXO, Mom and Dad. Again. The exact same words. The same dismissive excuse. They chose her manufactured social drama over my life-threatening heart condition. Again. A chilling wave of déjà vu washed over me, so potent it almost eclipsed the physical pain. I saw it all with horrifying clarity. My first life, this same hospital, this same callous text. I remembered the despair that had followed, the lonely descent as my condition worsened, my parents' chairs remaining empty beside my bed until the very end. I remembered the doctor's grave face, the unanswered calls, and the final suffocating realization that I was utterly expendable. Then, the disorienting jolt of rebirth. Waking up years younger, a teenager again, but carrying the full, crushing weight of those memories. The intervening years had felt like a shadow play, an agonizing wait for the inevitable, pre-known betrayals to unfold. I had felt powerless to change them, but slowly, secretly, I had been preparing to change my own path. This time, the familiar despair was pierced by a cold, sharp clarity. They would not kill me with their neglect again. In that first life, the one that ended in this very hospital, I'd scrolled through Clara's social media updates from that infamous sleepover. Her face beaming, my parents visible in the background, doting and oblivious. My desperate calls had gone to voicemail. A nurse had offered sympathetic but helpless gestures. The medical crisis escalated, the beeping monitors a soundtrack to my isolation. The doctor had tried, fruitlessly, to reach my parents for consent for a risky but necessary procedure. The fear was a living thing, coiling in my gut, but it was the agonizing weight of being unloved, of being deemed less important than a teenage party, that had truly broken me before the illness claimed my last breath. They didn't even come to say goodbye, I had thought then. Were they relieved? If there was any justice, any other chance, I had vowed, I would not let this happen again. The terror of rebirth, the sheer impossibility of it, had slowly given way to a grim understanding of the burden and the opportunity it presented. Their script, their pattern of neglect, was immutable. But this time, I held the pen for my own lines. A doctor was assessing me now, his brow furrowed. He explained my condition was serious, requiring immediate admission and specialized tests. He asked for family contact details to update them, to get consent if needed. In my first life, I'd tearfully insisted they keep trying my parents, clinging to a desperate hope. This time, though pale, and fighting for each breath, my voice was quiet but firm. My parents are unavailable at the moment. However, I have a legal representative who manages my affairs. Here is their contact information. I recited the number of Ms. Albright, a discreet, high-powered solicitor I'd cultivated over the past few months. The funds from my great-aunt's small, forgotten inheritance, an inheritance my parents had planned to absorb for Clara's endless needs, but which I had quietly secured in this second life, had made that connection possible. No more begging for their attention. No more making myself small. The doctor, though visibly surprised, nodded professionally. This small act of providing an alternative, of taking control, felt monumental. They expected me to be their helpless victim, desperate for their belated attention. They had no idea who I'd become while they were busy orchestrating Clara's social calendar. I made a mental note to action the transfer of a significant sum to the secure account Miss Albright had helped me establish. Then, with a steady finger, I deleted my mother's text without a reply. It wasn't just the critical moments, the life or death situations that defined their neglect. It was the daily erosion of my worth, a tapestry woven from 1,000 dismissals. My 10th birthday in my first life, a small forgotten cake, my parents rushing off because Clara felt a bit left out and needed a special shopping trip to compensate. My major academic award ceremony, their empty seats in the auditorium because Clara had a minor dance recital rehearsal. A severe flu that had me bedridden for a week. I was left alone with stern instructions to not bother Clara, who was studying for some trivial school test. These patterns had repeated with chilling precision in this second life, despite my cautious, subtle attempts to shift the dynamic in my early years of rebirth. Each time, Clara would manufacture a crisis, a need, a whim that conveniently and completely overshadowed any event or requirement of mine. My parents enabled it, encouraged it. I wasn't a daughter to them, I'd come to understand. The realization a constant, dull ache. I was an inconvenience, a foil for Clara's perceived brilliance and manufactured fragility. They didn't just neglect me, they actively erased me to make more space for her. While they were busy with Clara's social schedule and dismissing my achievements, I had been the quiet architect of my own future. Late nights in my small study nook, the glow of a secure laptop my only companion, I'd learned about offshore banking, encrypted communication, the subtle art of online investment. Foreknowledge from my first life, a failed tech startup here, a surprising market surge there, had allowed me to grow the modest funds from my great-aunt's legacy into something substantial. Each casual dismissal of my allowance, every forgotten educational expense they were supposed to cover, I had meticulously documented. Then, I had reimbursed myself from the great-aunt's fund, transferring the equivalent amounts into my private, untraceable accounts. "Don't worry your pretty little head about money, Ilara," Father would say, his tone patronizing, usually right before diverting funds meant for my textbooks to one of Clara's expensive hobbies. The irony was a bitter pill, but the secret thrill of my growing independence was a potent antidote. Each successful trade, each small, carefully managed gain, was another brick in the wall of my autonomy. A wall they would never breach, a fortress built on their disinterest. My maternal grandmother, a woman I'd barely known in my first life, had become a silent, posthumous ally in this one. I remembered her as a distant, somewhat formidable figure, her attempts at connection always thwarted by my parents' subtle interference. But in my second life, armed with fragmented memories of a special provision she'd once alluded to, I had discreetly contacted her old family solicitor shortly after her passing a year ago. Ms. Albright, the very same solicitor now on my hospital admission form, had been surprised by my inquiries, but respecting her late client's clear intentions, had revealed the truth. Grandmother had indeed established a substantial independent medical and educational trust for me. Its terms were ironclad, specifically designed to be inaccessible to my parents, a bulwark against their proven financial irresponsibility and blatant favoritism. In my first life, they had managed to contest, delay, and ultimately absorb these funds into the black hole of Clara's perceived needs. This time, with Ms. Albright's astute guidance, I had activated it swiftly and silently. Grandma saw them, I'd thought with a surge of warmth and vindication. She saw their games, their cruelty, even when I was too young or too broken to understand. This wasn't just about money. It was about honoring her faith, her protective love. It was the armor she had bequeathed me, and it would fund my sanctuary. Back in my hospital room, the specialist confirmed my condition required significant recovery time in a completely stress-free, highly specialized environment. My parents were, predictably, out of the room, no doubt on the phone to Clara, offering comfort for her sleepover catastrophe. I seized the moment. The call to Ethelgard, the exclusive private medical resort, was brief and efficient. I discussed my medical needs, the logistics of a private transfer, and the payment from my personal medical trust. The representative, accustomed to clients requiring the utmost discretion, was reassuring. Absolute privacy, no unauthorized visitors. No more drafty recovery rooms with dismissive nurses and the constant suffocating shadow of their impending visits and empty apologies, I mused. The sheer relief of knowing I had both the means and the will to dictate the terms of my own care was intoxicating. They'll expect me convalescing in Clara's old, dusty room, pathetically grateful for whatever leftover scraps of attention they deign to throw my way. The shock when they discover the truth will be considerable. The day before my planned secret discharge to Ethelgard, my parents and Clara staged their customary family conference in my hospital room. They arrived bearing Clara's favorite high-calorie snacks, items I was medically forbidden to eat, and a prepackaged narrative of concern. Mother announced their plan for my recovery. I'd come home naturally. Clara, ever the martyr, would help look after me, which in practice meant I would become a captive audience for her latest dramas and demands. Father, with a sigh that spoke of his profound financial sacrifices, mentioned that due to my unexpectedly costly illness, they might have to dip into Clara's vital university fund, a fund I knew, with grim certainty, was largely composed of my own misdirected inheritances. Therefore, I needed to recover quickly and not be a prolonged burden. I listened politely, a faint smile playing on my lips as they outlined their vision of my docile convalescence under their benevolent control. When they paused, awaiting my grateful acquiescence, I simply said, "Thank you for your concern and for making such thoughtful plans. However, my medical team has arranged for my continued convalescence at a specialized facility that can better manage my complex needs. All expenses are fully covered." A stunned silence descended. Mother was the first to recover. "Specialized facility? What facility, Alara? Why weren't we consulted? We're your parents." Father, his face flushing, chimed in. "And these expenses, covered by whom?" "Alara, you need to be sensible. We can't have you bankrupting yourself on some whim." Clara predictably pouted. "But I wanted to help you get better, Ilara. I was going to read all my favorite magazines to you." Their panic was almost comical. It wasn't about my well-being, it was about their loss of control, their loss of access to my resources, their loss of the familiar drama where I played the suffering victim. Later that day, they peppered me with agitated questions. The facility's name, its location, its cost, the source of the funds. They even tried to corner the hospital staff who, thanks to Ms. Albright's prior forceful intervention, cited patient confidentiality with unwavering politeness. I remained calm, infuriatingly evasive. "It's a private arrangement," I'd murmur, or, "My medical advisors feel this is best for my specific recovery trajectory." Clara, switching tactics, tried feigned tears. "Alara, are you ashamed of us? Is that why you're hiding where you're going? Don't you love us anymore?" I met her gaze, my own clear and steady. "This isn't about anyone but my health, Clara. I require a very quiet, focused, and medically supervised environment for the next phase of my recovery." Their playbook, the one filled with guilt trips and emotional blackmail, was proving utterly ineffective against my newfound tranquil composure. They were so predictable. They only knew a few moves, and I had finally learned to sidestep them all. The next morning, the charade reached its quiet, decisive end. My parents and Clara were in my hospital room, still attempting to argue against my mysterious facility, still expecting to bundle me into their car and take me back to their suffocating house. As Father was loudly lecturing a nurse on parental rights, a sleek, unmarked luxury medical transport vehicle, looking more like something a diplomat would use, purred to a stop outside the hospital entrance. Two professional, impeccably dressed attendants emerged, greeted me quietly by name, and gently assisted me into a waiting wheelchair. My pre-packed designer luggage, another secret acquisition from the Great Aunts Fund, already stowed. I was wearing a comfortable but undeniably expensive cashmere travel set, a stark contrast to the threadbare hospital gown. I offered my stunned family a brief, polite nod. "Thank you for coming," I said, my voice even. "I will be in touch when I'm settled." Then, without a backward glance, I allowed the attendants to wheel me to the waiting vehicle. Clara let out a last-minute wail. "But what about me?" that I serenely ignored. The vehicle door closed with a soft, satisfying thud, sealing me away from their bewildered, impotent fury. The chains were broken, not with a dramatic shattering, but with the quiet click of a well-engineered door. As we drove away, I imagined their frantic calls to each other, their desperate attempts to glean information, to reassert control. For the first time, they had no leverage, no information, no power over my next move, and I had peace. Ethelgard was more than I could have imagined. Nestled high in the Swiss Alps, its architecture was a breathtaking blend of modern glass and warm natural stone, seamlessly integrated into the pristine mountain landscape. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the faint scent of pine. My private medical jet had landed at a small, exclusive airfield, and the transfer to the resort itself was swift and discreet. I was greeted personally by Dr. Armitage, the renowned head physician, a man whose gentle eyes held a surprising depth of understanding. Oh, my suite was an oasis of calm, panoramic windows framing snow-capped peaks, natural light flooding the tastefully appointed space, medical equipment so subtly integrated it was almost invisible. It felt less like a medical facility and more like a five-star retreat dedicated to holistic healing. This isn't a hospital, I thought, as an attendant unpacked my bags with quiet efficiency. This is a sanctuary, a place where healing is not just a medical process, but an art. The sensory contrast to the grim, emotionally charged environments of my past was overwhelming. The quiet professionalism, the genuine warmth of the staff, a warmth I was, of course, paying handsomely for, but the choice, the agency was mine. The pervasive sense of tranquility. It was a world away from the stifling atmosphere of my parents' home and the chaotic neglect of my previous hospital stays. They thought I'd be tucked away in a charity ward, or worse, languishing in their oppressive guest room, a convenient repository for their fleeting moments of guilt. If they could only see me now, I mused with a small, ironic smile. My days at Ethelgard settled into a rhythm of profound healing. Mornings began with personalized treatments for my heart condition, administered by leading specialists who listened intently and adjusted protocols based on my feedback. Gentle physiotherapy sessions in a sun-drenched studio rebuilt my physical strength. Nutritious gourmet meals, tailored to my specific dietary needs, were served in the privacy of my suite, or in a quiet dining area overlooking the alpine meadows. But perhaps the most transformative part of my recovery was the work I did with Dr. Evans, a compassionate therapist with expertise in trauma and familial dysfunction. With her guidance, I began to unpack the layers of neglect and emotional abuse, to understand the dynamics that had shaped my two lives. I'd learned mindfulness techniques to manage the lingering anxiety, started journaling to process the torrent of memories and emotions, and rediscovered simple joys I had long forgotten. Reading for pleasure in a comfortable armchair by the fire, sketching the breathtaking scenery outside my window, taking short, meditative walks in the resort's secluded gardens. I saw tangible improvements, not just in my physical health, but in my spirit. The staff at Ethelgard addressed me with unwavering respect, involved me in every decision regarding my care, validated my experiences. Here, my voice matters, I wrote in my journal one evening, the flames in the hearth casting a warm glow on the page. My pain is acknowledged. My needs are prioritized. I'm not just recovering from an illness, I'm recovering from a lifetime of emotional starvation, a famine of love and acceptance. I was beginning to feel a sense of self-worth that was entirely independent of my family's approval, a quiet strength blooming in the fertile ground of genuine care. Predictably, the tranquility of Ethelgard was soon disturbed by ripples from the outside world, or rather by my family's increasingly agitated attempts to breach its serenity. Ms. Albright, my solicitor, provided filtered updates, a barrage of calls to her office, to Ethelgard's main line, which were, of course, expertly stonewalled by the resort's highly trained staff, even attempts to glean information through distant family acquaintances. The voicemails they left, which Ms. Albright occasionally forwarded transcripts of for my amusement or information, as you see fit, Ms. Alara, were a predictable medley of manipulation. Mother's messages oscillated between saccharine pleas of feigned concern. "Alara, darling, we're just so worried sick about you. Please let us know you're all right." And wounded accusations. "How can you be so cruel, shutting out your own mother? Don't you know how much this is hurting me?" Fathers were more direct, laced with barely concealed anger and demands for financial information. Ilara, this exorbitant facility must be costing a fortune. As your father, I demand to know the source of these funds and how they are being managed. Clara, true to form, sent a series of melodramatic texts and voice notes directly to the old phone number I no longer monitored, messages filled with self-pity and attempts to induce guilt. Lara, I miss you so much. I cry every night. The house is so empty without you to talk to. Please come home. I need you. I instructed Ethelgard's staff to maintain the strict no visitor and no direct calls policy. Through Ms. Albright, I sent 2 brief, neutrally worded email updates. My recovery is progressing as expected under medical supervision. I will be in touch when my physicians deem it appropriate. I require absolute rest and privacy at this time. Their voices are like static from a distant, broken radio, I thought, observing the pristine snow on the mountain peaks from my window. They still don't understand. They think this is a childish tantrum, a temporary phase of rebellion. They cannot comprehend that this is a permanent severance. The old familiar ache of guilt tried to surface, a phantom limb of past conditioning. But I pushed it down, focusing on Dr. Evans' words about healthy boundaries. The more they push, I realized with a stark clarity, the more undeniable the necessity of this distance becomes. They built the walls between us, brick by painstaking brick, with every forgotten promise, every dismissed pain, every casual act of cruelty. Ethelgard just provided the gates and the lock. My discharge from Ethelgard was as serene and understated as my arrival. Dr. Armitage, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners, expressed his profound satisfaction with my remarkable recovery, handing me a comprehensive long-term wellness plan. "You've made extraordinary progress, Ilara," he said, his handshake firm and reassuring. "Remember, true healing is an ongoing journey, not a destination." There was no chaotic family fanfare, no forced smiles or thinly veiled resentments. Just a quiet, dignified departure in a private car. Not a medical transport this time, but a comfortable sedan, arranged by Ms. Albright. I wasn't going back to my parents' house, to the stifling atmosphere of my old life. Months ago, I had instructed my solicitor to secure a new private residence for me, a sanctuary of my own choosing. As the car pulled away from Ethelgard's discreet gates, I glanced back at the majestic peaks that had cradled my recovery. Leaving Ethelgard isn't an ending, I thought, a genuine smile touching my lips, but a true beginning. I walked in broken, physically and emotionally. I'm walking out whole. The deep gratitude for the care, the peace, the space I had found there resonated within me. The old Ilara would have dutifully returned to their suffocating embrace, starved for any crumb of affection. This Ilara has her own wings and her own sky. My posture was more upright now, my gaze steady, my clothing reflecting a quiet confidence I hadn't possessed before. While I had been cocooned at Ethelgard, focusing on my health, Ms. Albright, acting with precision and the full authority of the grandmother's trust, had been diligently untangling the financial webs my parents had woven. The reports she provided were illuminating, if not entirely surprising. My parents, discovering their usual avenues of accessing funds related to me, or more accurately, funds they believed were still indirectly tied to me, were now firmly blocked, had apparently attempted to leverage the grandmother's estate directly. They were met with polite but immovable resistance from the trust's administrators. The loopholes they'd exploited in my first life, the ambiguities they'd twisted to their advantage, had been meticulously closed off. The medical expenses they might have audaciously tried to claim from insurers for my care were, of course, a non-issue. Ethelgard's substantial bills had been settled discreetly and directly by the private trust, leaving no paper trail for them to manipulate. They were facing the stark reality that my financial independence, a concept they had never truly countenanced, meant their own long-established financial safety net, one that often relied on siphoning funds meant for me or leveraging my existence for sympathy or gain, had vanished. They always saw me as either a burden to be minimized or a resource to be exploited, I reflected, reading through Ms. Albright's summary. Now that I am neither, now that I am simply separate, they find themselves adrift. There was a certain grim satisfaction in knowing the trust was functioning precisely as grandmother had intended, as a shield and a foundation for my genuine well being, not as another trough for their endless, grasping needs. They accuse me of being cold and unfeeling about money, I mused, but they were the ones who taught me its cruel power, lesson by painful lesson, through their constant deprivation of me and their lavish indulgence of Clara's every whim. Clara, too, was apparently struggling to adapt to the new paradigm. Without me as the constant, reliable victim to rally her parents' undivided attention, or as the convenient scapegoat for her own shortcomings, her usual manipulative tactics were losing their efficacy. Miss Albright had relayed with a touch of dry amusement reports from distant family acquaintances. Clara's emergencies and overwhelming sensitivities no longer elicited the same frantic, guilt-ridden responses from our parents, who were now consumed by their own mounting financial anxieties and the unsettling mystery of my independent recovery and resources. Her academic performance, never stellar but always propped up by parental intervention and funds for tutors or special considerations, was reportedly faltering. Her social standing, built on the illusion of wealth and status her parents could no longer convincingly project, was waning. She had apparently tried to contact me through various old channels, her messages a predictable blend of saccharine whining, "Alara, I miss you so much. It's just not the same without you." Passive aggressive accusations. "I hope you're happy now that you've abandoned us all." And not so subtle inquiries about when I might be sharing some of Grandma's generosity. The spotlight she craved so desperately is dimming now that her unwilling supporting cast, primarily me in the role of perpetual victim, has left the stage. I thought, feeling not pleasure in her difficulties, but a clinical detachment, an observation of inevitable cause and effect. Her power was always derivative, a reflection of my suffering and their indulgence. Now the mirror is broken. My new apartment, secured by Miss Albright in a vibrant, cultured district of a city far from my family's orbit, was a haven of light and understated elegance. It wasn't ostentatious, but it was mine, every detail chosen by me for me. I spent those first few weeks settling in, establishing new routines that revolved around my continued well-being and burgeoning interests. I enrolled in online courses, deepening my knowledge in areas my parents had dismissed as unladylike or impractical in my first life: astrophysics and ancient history. I began to manage my investments with a more active hand, guided by Ms. Albright and a team of surprisingly respectful financial advisors who treated me as an intelligent adult, not a naive girl. And I started to sketch again, a passion I'd abandoned in my childhood when Clara had declared my drawings gloomy and my parents had promptly redirected my art supplies to her more cheerful endeavors. One afternoon, a courier delivered a small velvet-wrapped package. Inside, nestled on a bed of silk, was a delicate antique locket, my grandmother's favorite, the one she always wore. A note from Ms. Albright explained that grandmother had left specific instructions for it to be given to me once I was truly settled and free. Tears welled in my eyes as I fastened it around my neck. "This is mine," I whispered to the quiet, sunlit room. "Earned, chosen, built on the ashes of a life they tried to dictate, and watered by the love of a grandmother who saw me." The joy was in the simple things: decorating my space with art that I loved, cooking meals that nourished my body, making decisions, big and small, without the need for anyone's approval or the constant, draining anticipation of their disapproval. The ghosts of the past were fading, replaced by the quiet hum of a future I was actively, joyfully creating. Months passed, an interlude of quiet growth and consolidation. Then came the inevitable summons. Not a demand this time, but a hesitant, almost pleading request for a meeting, relayed through Miss Albright's office. They had somehow, through a combination of desperate searching and perhaps a reluctant tip-off from a very distant family branch, found my general location. I agreed, but strictly on my terms, a neutral venue, Ms. Albright's formal but impersonal city office, for a precisely limited duration, with her present. As I walked into the conference room, the visual contrast was stark. I felt composed, my health restored, dressed in a tailored suit that spoke of quiet confidence. They, my mother, father, and Clara, looked diminished. Stress had etched new lines on my parents' faces. Their attire, while still presentable, lacked its former expensive sheen. Clara, stripped of her usual dramatic props and audience, seemed smaller, her pout more petulant than pitiable. The desperation is palpable, I observed internally, taking my seat opposite them, Ms. Albright a calm, authoritative presence beside me. They are not here out of love or genuine remorse, but because their world has been irrevocably upended, and they still cling to the delusion that I am the key to restoring it to their liking. I braced myself for the predictable onslaught of guilt, manipulation, and thinly veiled demands. The performance began, almost on cue. Mother led with tearful appeals, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "How could you abandon us like this, Alara? We're your family. We miss you terribly. We admit we made mistakes, we weren't perfect, but doesn't family forgive? Doesn't family stick together?" Father, attempting a blend of authoritarian bluster and feigned paternal concern, followed. "This independent streak, Alara, it's unhealthy. You need our guidance, our experience, especially with these significant funds your grandmother left. We can help you manage them, protect you from making costly mistakes." The implication was clear: let us control your money. Clara, ever the opportunist, chimed in with a whine that set my teeth on edge. "My life has been so incredibly hard since you left, Alara. Mom and Dad are stressed and unhappy all the time. They can't afford my special treatments anymore. For a conveniently vague new ailment, no doubt. Or my essential university extras. It's all your fault for being so incredibly selfish with Grandma's money, hoarding it all for yourself." I listened with minimal interruption, my expression calm, perhaps taking a slow sip of the water Miss Albright had thoughtfully provided. My silence, my lack of expected emotional reaction, seemed to unnerve them far more than any argument or accusation could have. The same old script, I thought, a wave of weariness washing over me, not for myself, but for their immutable toxic patterns. Guilt, blame, entitlement. They haven't learned a single thing. They don't see me, they see a walking, talking bank account, a magical solution to the myriad problems their own choices have created. I noted with a kind of clinical detachment how swiftly Clara's supposed concern for my well-being had morphed into blatant demands for money for herself. When their torrent of rehearsed grievances and manipulative pleas finally subsided, they looked at me, an almost desperate expectation in their eyes, waiting for the old Alara to break, to concede, to apologize for her own strength, and seek their forgiveness for daring to exist outside their control. I let the silence stretch for a moment, then met each of their gazes in turn. My voice, when I finally spoke, was quiet but firm, devoid of the anger or tears they clearly anticipated, imbued instead with an unshakable crystalline resolve. "You speak of family," I began, my words measured. "Let me remind you what my experience of this family has been." I then calmly, factually enumerated the key betrayals: the final abandonment at the hospital for Clara's trivial sleepover, the years of consistent medical neglect dismissed as anxiety, the systematic undermining of my education and well-being to perpetually elevate Clara, and, most damningly, the information Ms. Albright had recently uncovered regarding their deliberate, systematic mismanagement and diversion of funds, specifically designated for my care and education from my great-aunt's original inheritance, funds that had instead bankrolled Clara's expensive whims and propped up father's failing business ventures. I presented this not as an emotional outburst, but as a statement of incontrovertible facts, the foundation for the unbridgeable chasm their actions had carved between us. Ms. Albright subtly slid a slim file across the table towards my father, a summary of the forensic accounting. "What you call family," I continued, my voice steady, "I experienced as a consistent source of profound and repeated pain, neglect, and financial exploitation. I have, as you can see, moved on. The grandmother's trust and all assets pertaining to me are being managed precisely as she intended, for my well-being, my education, and my future. A future that, I must make explicitly clear, does not involve your financial oversight or personal involvement. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle in the oppressive silence of the conference room. I wish you the best, I concluded, the formality a clear signal of severance, in managing your own affairs from this point forward. Then I stood, Ms. Albright rising with me. The meeting was over, their sputtering protests, Clara's sudden wail of, "But that's not fair!" my mother's choked sob. They were mere background noise as I walked out of the room and out of their lives, for good. The final curtain, I thought, a strange, quiet peace settling over me. No encore. They wrote me out of their lives countless times, in countless ways. Now, I've simply edited the script to reflect the undeniable truth. It wasn't triumph I felt, but the profound relief of a battle finally laid to rest. A battle I had won by simply refusing to fight it on their toxic, manipulative terms any longer. A year or two later, I found myself at a small, elegant charity gala. I had established a foundation in my grandmother's name using a portion of the trust she had so carefully preserved for me. Its mission was simple: to provide critical medical aid, educational scholarships, and holistic support for young people battling chronic illnesses who, like the girl I once was, lacked adequate or supportive family structures. The work was deeply fulfilling, a way to transform my own past pain into a beacon of hope for others. That evening, as I was discussing a new initiative with one of the foundation's trustees, Ms. Albright discreetly handed me a folded note. It was a brief, formal update from her office. The legal proceedings regarding my parents' mishandling of my great-aunt's inheritance and their attempts to improperly influence the grandmother's trust had concluded. They had been forced into a significant financial settlement, compelling them to drastically downsize their home and lifestyle. Clara, without the constant parental subsidy and the drama of my illness to deflect from her own lack of ambition, was reportedly working a series of unfulfilling, low-paying jobs. Her dreams of effortless luxury and fame having evaporated into the harsh light of reality. Their choices led them to their path, I thought, feeling not a shred of malice, only a distant, somber acknowledgement of consequences long overdue. My choices finally have led me to mine. Later that year, while on a quiet working holiday in a small coastal town in Italy, a trip to explore potential international partnerships for my foundation, I saw a fleeting image online. A distant acquaintance from my old hometown had posted a picture from a local community event. In the background, almost out of focus, were my parents. They looked older, irrevocably worn, a certain weary tension in their posture. Clara was beside them, her usual vibrant attire replaced by something drab, her expression sullen. They were arguing, their gestures sharp and resentful. I zoomed in, a strange detachment settling over me. They were characters in a story I no longer inhabited, their drama playing out on a stage far, far from mine. I closed the browser, the image fading as quickly as it had appeared. The power they once held over my emotions, the ability to wound me with a careless word or a calculated act of neglect, was completely gone. Forgiveness, I mused, looking out at the tranquil Mediterranean Sea, the scent of lemon groves drifting on the warm breeze, isn't about forgetting what they did or excusing it. It's about remembering with absolute clarity that I deserved better. And then dedicating my life to building that better, not just for myself, but for others who walk a similar path. Dawn was breaking over the city skyline, painting the clouds in hues of rose and gold. I stood on the balcony of my apartment, a mug of herbal tea warming my hands. The vast expanse of the awakening metropolis spread out before me. My health was stable, my heart condition managed with a combination of cutting-edge medicine and the holistic practices I'd embraced at Ethelgard. Life was full, my work with the foundation was challenging and profoundly rewarding. I had cultivated a small circle of genuine, supportive friends. The quiet joy of my days was a testament to the choices I had made, the battles I had fought, primarily within myself, to reclaim my life. They chose her sleepover over my hospital stay. Again, I thought, the memory no longer a stab of pain, but a distant factual marker on a long and arduous journey. And in that final, predictable act of betrayal, they unwittingly handed me the greatest gift of all, the absolute, irrefutable certainty that my life had to be and would be entirely my own. Ethelgard, the private resort that had seemed like an impossible dream, had been merely the first step. The real sanctuary, I now understood, was the one I had painstakingly, lovingly built within myself. The sun crested the horizon, flooding my balcony with light, and I smiled, a quiet, confident smile that reached my eyes. The future was an unwritten symphony, and I, at long last, was its sole composer.